Welcome to Podcast IRC, conversations with Indigenous scholars to advance understandings and gain new knowledge, hosted by the Indigenous Research Center at Salish Kootenai College. Okay, so that was a clip of Sophie Moise and Mary Kaiser. And what they're singing there is called the Sinyudlamin, and it was one of many songs that would be sung during what we call the Sayudlam. And during this Sayudlam, right at the beginning of when the dance was called for, the men would go around and sing another particular song that would announce to the camp that this Sayudlam was going to take place. And then at that time, the women would start preparing for the Sayudlam. They would put on the man's, either their husband or their son, or maybe their uncle's war shirt, maybe their headdress. And then the men would start singing this particular song that you just heard, and the women would start proceeding to the teepees that were predetermined. Sometimes they were the teepee of a man who was noted for his face painting skills or the color that he used. And so the women would oftentimes they'd race to the particular teepee of the man who was maybe noted for having the best kind of paint or the best pattern of painting of the faces. And the women would be getting their robes on that depicted the battle that their relative was in, and they'd proceed to these teepees to get ready and prepare for the full Sayudlam, which would happen after this song of preparation was over. And this song was recorded in 1950, and it was one of few songs that really remain that are marking this time of preparation. There's probably one or two others that mark this time of preparation, but I thought this was kind of a fitting song to start out this conversation with our guest we have today, because paint comes from a particular part of the earth, the soil that holds a color, and those colors are very important to a number of individuals, not only in the past but today, because they mark a certain type of spiritual power that a person might have. They might have been granted a vision or a gift from their sacrifices telling them that they can use a certain type of or a certain color of paint and a particular pattern on how to paint themselves in that way. But in the old days, I guess there was a number of wars that would occur over a particular source of this paint. So in some place in Montana here near Wolf Creek, it's called, there's a cave, and that held the yellow paint. So it was just a really fine clay that had the yellow color. And oftentimes the Salish people would meet up with maybe some Blackfeets or Crows, and they'd have a battle to obtain that paint. So that soil, which had the yellow color, would oftentimes be an indication of a person's bravery. If you seen them wearing yellow, they'd be noted as being a very brave person. But I wanted to kind of start this out by mentioning that, but also wanted to kind of give Lydia, Dr. Jennings here, a chance to introduce herself and kind of let us know the work that she does, and then we can launch into some discussion about that. So welcome to the podcast. Glad you took the time out. Let us know who you are and what you do.
So Loa San Shaniva in Epo Lydia, and I'm Lydia. I'm a member of the Pascua Yaqui tribe and then also the Huichol nations. So Pascua Yaqui is down in southern Arizona and Mexico, and then the Huichol are kind of western Mexico area. And I actually grew up in New Mexico and Tewa lands, which is where I'm at right now, visiting my family and coming to you for this podcast. And I am a PhD candidate. I haven't quite finished yet.
Oh,
COVID set
sorry.
some
Okay.
things back. No, it's all good. But, you know, COVID is having its impacts in many different ways, and it kind of set me back a little bit. So hopefully in a couple of months we can say that.
Oh, good.
And yeah,
Okay.
I'm a soil microbiologist. I study mining reclamation in southern Arizona on the Tonatham Nation. And then my minor is in American Indian policy. And so also looking at the policy around mining on what are now public lands, ceded lands of Indigenous peoples. And so I'm working on a case study looking at the Santa Rita mountain range that has been an area proposed for some mining activity. So kind of looking at mining in the policy side, but also looking at it from the soil science side and microbiology side of how do we repair these ecosystems, and also how do we prevent these ecosystems from being impacted. And I love that you started with soil, because I think, you know, that's something that has really caught my eye. And you talked about the art, the artistic component of it, and the spiritual component of it. And that's something that's definitely missed in my own scholarship. I think when most education programs train students, they tend to think about soil as something that can be produced, and that you tend to think about it from food sovereignty topics. But also, I think it misses this first really big step, that soil in itself is so beautiful. And just like we as Indigenous people have gone around different parts of the country in our own communities looking for different plants that have certain medicinal purposes, well, so does soil. And there's a lot of, as I've been I use Instagram and I use social media a lot to talk about soils and help people think about it. Because I think when we talk about conservation, soil is kind of the ugly stepchild. Like, no one thinks about conserving soils. We think about conserving plants.
Poor soil.
Or we think about conserving plants. Yeah, it's like, give us some love, because that's the basis of everything else, right? But people talk about conserving plants or conserving certain animal species, which are important, but all those are dependent on soil, and soil is this important filtration level. And so I think when we talk, what I hope to bring into the soil science discipline, I think, is more talking about it from this place of appreciation that our Indigenous peoples have always had. And when I've talked with and shared with that on social media, it's amazing how many Indigenous people will be like, oh yeah, our people use it for these ceremonial purposes. You know, and sometimes we'll feel comfortable to go more in detail. And they're like, I'm so glad I can talk to you about this. And like, you understand like coming of age ceremony or medicine men, that I would never feel comfortable sharing another way. And I think it just really highlights how important it is that we have Indigenous researchers in all of these different areas to kind of help our own community members think about these passions that are in these aspects of our community that are so important that they haven't always thought about in this context because of how typical research is framed around it. So I just want to start off with that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that is, you know, just to throw in something real quick here. I know you had a post on your Instagram one time about these little soil kits that were of different colors, you know, and that you could use them for paints. And I thought that was so cool. I was like, wow, that is neat.
Yeah. So as you know, Shadeen, like, I'm also a really passionate trail runner. And part of that is because I get to go around to different landscapes. And then you see all these amazing geologic formations. And, you know, with geology is the parent material of soils, right? It's the parent of soils. And so I love going out and seeing these formations, but then also, if I can, collect soils from those places. And when I do outreach with students, we can make paints out of these places, these soils that I've collected from my runs. And I can tell stories about, like, I got this in this place. This is why it's important. And the other part that I really like doing is also looking up the names and looking at the names of the soil series. And so, like, right now I'm in New Mexico, and I went running in the Galisteo Basin, which is, again, like Tewa area, and just collecting a couple of soils and then looking at them, looking up their names. And one of them was called the Chupadero soil series, which Chupadero means like sucking or sucked, and it's a name for like a soil series that has been really weathered down, but it has this bright yellow color. Another one is the Zia, and it's this bright red soil. And it's the Zia soil series. And so just like connecting the name of the soils, the land bases, and how they're created, I think, is so beautiful. But also to tell students about these stories of the soils and how you obtain them. And for them to not only learn about the soils and how how they were created, but then also to visually touch them and feel the difference, I think is just so powerful and engaging people to think about the importance of these places and how long it takes soils to be formed so that we can have those experiences with them.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so
that's so cool. Keep talking. I'm like listening. Keep talking.
Well, and so one of the things I wanted to say is that me and a couple of other soil scientists that I collaborate with, we're actually going to be running 150 miles next year to bring attention to soils and why they're so important. And so the kits that you saw, we've actually been collecting soils and then making little painting kits that we're selling as like a fundraiser for that.
Wow.
So, and it's, and for me, like I have a Southern Arizona series that I've collected, and one of our collaborators has one from Wyoming. And so you can kind of see the difference in soils, the different names, the different colors, right? Like the USGS has made a map of all the United States and the different soil colors. And it's amazing the range of soil colors that you have across the United States that really speaks to the unique ecology and geology of those places. And so being in Santa Fe, I think a lot about like Santa Fe Indian Market and like all the amazing Indigenous artists that are here and how they incorporate those aspects of their ecology into their artwork. And I just think that's like a really amazing component of it, is thinking about it from a soil scientist perspective and the ecology perspective, but then also in how that translates into our people's traditional arts. So anyways.
That's great.
Wow.
I was secretly trying to Instagram stalk you just so I could see some of these images.
I already did.
Did you find her?
I did find her. I'm like, we need to get those kits because I would love one of those kits. And I love what you're doing with soil because around here with botany and learning the plants in both Latin and then of course in Salish or Kootenai, and then figuring out where it's at and its habitat and, you know, all of that, that's really big around here. But I guess I never thought about doing that with soil. So that's like even more amazing, you know, just to think about that you're doing that. That's way cool. That's way awesome.
Thank you. So I'm going to drop the handles. So my Instagram is like, it's at LL Jennings, but that's like my own personal one. And so it's like a lot of pictures of my dog, places I go running, reflections I have. And then there was the running project that we're doing. It's called We'll Run for Soil. And so that's that album, We'll Run for Soil. And that one is a collaboration with 2 other soil scientists as well. And so we have a lot more like nerdy facts on there about soils.
That's pretty cool. You know, I had the opportunity to teach a soils class for about the last 6 years, and you know, I was never trained as a soil scientist really, but when you take geology and you get a degree in environmental science, you get introduced to a little bit of soil topics here and there, but once you dive into it, man, you realize how precious that little thin sliver of earth is on top of the globe, and it's astounding. And you can really open students' eyes when you start talking about how long it takes to make soil, you know, and it's just an amazing thing. And then to start tying it back to something really, really important, something so important that, you know, people used to battle over it for, you know, something so important as the color in that soil seems to be a pretty significant.
And I think the other part with soil science, right, is it's so interdisciplinary. And it's so complex. Like so my undergrad was in environmental science and technology and policy with a concentration in watershed science. And so when I was looking at programs, I was like, I don't know, like soils, they're not very sexy like water is, right?
I didn't realize water was high on the list of sexy fields, but good to know.
But like, you know, people are like, soil, you want to be studying dirt, like a dirt nerd. But then like, I remember talking to a boss with my boss about at the time, and he's like, it's so complex. And so I took a course and I was just amazed because I think, you know, soils isn't everything. Engineers need to know, engineers and construction, you need to understand soils in terms of understanding how saturation is going to impact your building construction, agriculture, and understanding nutrient dynamics in soils, arid environments, and how is soils getting transferred. I mean, in like atmospheric science, like everything, it's so interconnected. And so I think that's another component is, as you mentioned, Shandine, is that a lot of people don't think about soils and how much their lives are impacted by them, but they really are just so prevalent in so many different fields of study. But it's just really interesting how they don't seem to get that kind of attention. And even in looking at I'm working on a paper right now talking about diversity in soil science, and it's really interesting that a lot of people who are maybe in hydrology or geology, they kind of go to these different fields as opposed to like a standard soil science field, and why that is. And especially for Native peoples, I think understanding soils and why they're important and how they connect to our food sovereignty, how they connect to our land displacement is such an important thing that, and even looking at tribal colleges and how land grant institutions play into that. But a lot of land grant institutions that are on stolen tribal lands, weren't really given recognition or don't get the same kind of funding opportunities. And so I just think that's a really interesting process that I really am excited to explore more in the future.
Yeah. Why is that? Why don't we get enough funding? I want to know. That's what I want to know up front. Yeah. Soil is such an interesting thing. And, I just, when you agreed to be the host of this, or not the host. Yeah, you're going to host the rest of the show.
Sure, don't mind.
Yeah, you need to ask us questions now. Yeah. No, when you agreed to be a guest, that's the first song I thought of to introduce this show was that. I thought, okay, yeah, she's really into soil, and I was familiar with your posts on Instagram, and I thought this would be a good way to kind of jump into this episode. But one of our goals here at the Indigenous Research Center is we're trying to develop a methodological approach that works for Indigenous people, and specifically in geoscience. And there's a number of us in this group who are not in the geosciences, but that was the approach we wanted to take, because we feel that any study of any phenomenon on the earth takes a multidisciplinary approach. So one of the things that's always concerning to us is what is the pathway to knowledge that is appropriate for the native mind or the indigenous thinker, and how do we how do we express that in such a what can be sometimes an oppressive system in Western academics? So that's kind of the question I wanted to ask you: was how do you approach that? Trying to keep the indigenous part on the top, yet trying to navigate that Western academic scene.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think I know for myself, like when I got into my program, so I picked a topic that I knew is going to be something that is impacting Indigenous people, like mining. Even though my project directly was more on this very technical science side, I knew that I was going to have to find some kind of way to weave in indigeneity into that work. And like microbiology is not very the way it's typically taught is not very indigenous, right? It's a very quantitative, I think it's very disconnected from like the spirituality itself. And so the first thing I did in my program was really seeking out Native societies on our campus. And I decided to do my minor in American Indian Studies, I think specifically to balance all of this mental work with something that was a little more heart-centered, right? To talk about, and even just having community with other Native scholars there that I don't have in my own program. And I think through the process, I was able to kind of weave connections. It partially meant that I've like taken on way too many projects, but I mean, it's meaning that it's work that's more meaningful to me, and I'm able to weave in these important components. And it took me, I think, 2 years to really figure out my minor component of talking about the policy, when I felt like I was being pushed away from that by my advising committee, until I got to a point where I was like, I'm going to do this because that's why I'm doing this research. I like the science, but it has to have meaning and impact to me, to the people who I represent. And that was a really hard way of having your own agency. I think especially as many of you know, in the PhD process, the first couple of years, there's that power dynamic, right? Or the power imbalance. And so really being able to advocate for yourself and be more central in driving the direction of your research was a little bit more challenging. But eventually I think my committee saw that I had a lot of really great ideas and I had a sense of what I was doing. And so then they kind of were able to step back and let me really drive that vehicle. So I think that's a component, but I also coming back to family and having other people, you know, friends and community who ground you in that whole process, even if you are doing the really technical sciencey part, is really helpful. And of course, friends to joke with and humor is always going to get us through this whole process. So I think those have been kind of my saving graces, and then always coming back to running and that place of connecting me to the land and reminding me why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think, well, I guess it was my second year of my PhD. It was like when Standing Rock happened. Oh. I think it was maybe third year. I'm not sure.
They all blend together.
But also going up
exactly.
there. Yeah, I know. But going up there too and kind of seeing people talking about extraction. I mean, I work on copper mines, but that's just another form of extraction, and really seeing what's happening there and seeing how it compares and contrasts to the issues that we have in Southern Arizona with copper mining, which, you know, copper is a major product that we need in solar panels. And so when we talk about renewable energy, it's still extractive, right? And so just kind of seeing a lot of those comparisons and how Native people here are fighting to protect their lands from different extraction processes. And same thing with our communities down in Mexico. I think those all kind of remind me to give me purpose when I feel frustrated in the lab and like my experiments are failing. I think back to those situations that fuel me to keep on pushing forward. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
I guess I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind me jumping in. Shondine, is that okay?
Yeah, feel free.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So Lydia,
please.
you spoke about some of the mentors that you had, and it sounds like you have a really supportive committee to bring some of these new ideas to the field and your dissertation, what you're working on. But you had spoken just there at the end about the experiments that you do. So within the field of soil science, like specifically, are there ways to incorporate things like TEK? You had mentioned a little bit about like bringing the community into some of maybe the reasoning behind the stuff that you're studying, but you know, who is also bridging that gap in the field of soil science? I just don't know who those other Native scholars are, and then what are some of those things that you can, you know, bring from an Indigenous perspective into that very kind of specific, like you had mentioned, some of the experiments that you run.
Yeah, I think honestly, who is bridging the gap is a lot of emerging scholars, up and coming scholars. So I think, you know, Dr. Carletta Chief is in my department, mm-hmm. and I think she really kind of set the tone for a lot of us. I mean, she's the big reason why I came to my department, and she really applied that more, I think, to hydrology. But hydrology is, you know, water interacts with soil, so it's all part of that conversation. In terms of making sure Indigenous perspectives were in that. I also see with my department, I work with the Native Nations Institute, and that was really important for me to really shaping how I approach questions. And I think maybe my second or third year, I took the Indigenous Data Sovereignty course at the Native Nations Institute, taught by Dr. Stephanie Rousseau and Dr. Desi Lombert. And that was like one that really shifted my questions and my thinking, because I was like, why am I only taught like dead old white guys and their theories of ecology when like the Three Sisters, you know, stories like ubiquitous amongst Native people about, and that like, very well describes the nitrogen cycle, you know, all of these different agricultural principles. But like instead we're taught about Arthur Tansley and his theories of ecology. And so I remember after that, I was like really pushing back on my faculty or the professor of that class. And he was like, okay, well, you can teach like a section on that if you want. And so I did. And I got so much like positive feedback from other students. Right. And then it was like after the professor, and I know he was very well intentioned, but he's like, well, we want to make sure we incorporate more TEK. Like, who would you suggest in the reading? And I'm like, well, there's like a department in American Indian Studies. Like, you should reach out to them. And they have a TEK class. Like, they are doing that research. I can't make that recommendation. I'm still learning, you know? But I think that it's those kind of conversations with students, Native students, who are like pushing back on this curriculum of old dead white guys to really infuse that, right? And then of course, Dr. Robin Krimmer came to U of A, and she had basically had one of her former students as a faculty at U of A, and so somehow I got looped into this conversation of like working with high school students and her, and so I got to like co-teach a class with her, which is a really big honor. Right. But also talking about like ecology of the Sonoran desert ecosystem and explaining that with her, and then infusing soil science in that. And so I just think of like, I feel really honored with a lot of the fellows in my cohort, and also the Sloan Indigenous Fellowship Program that I'm part of, because I just see so many of our students who are like, yeah, the way that you're teaching it is like not sufficient, and pushing back on that. But as far as like specific techniques, I think that we're all trying to find creative ways of doing that right now, because it's not really present in the current soil science curriculum. And that's definitely something that I'm excited to explore more once I'm done with my current dissertation. So I think it's really
dissertation,
needed, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I have like a dissertation. I have a couple
Finish
of like,
side
projects.
Yeah, so. Don't we all? Don't we all?
Yeah.
I think that's what delays our dissertations more than anything.
For real.
Yeah. If we didn't have...
Just like the case in point you said about having to do the TEK lectures on behalf of that faculty. I mean, I did that too, and I feel like everyone else on this call probably had to step in moments like that. And that takes capacity and time and resources away from, finishing up the PhD. And I don't know, Shondine, were you ever asked to do that at University of Montana as well? Because you were the only Native in the department, possibly.
Yeah, I had to teach. I think it was like an online learning course, and God, what a time suck! I tell you what. But I don't think that was the cause of most of my delays in my dissertation. It was always other things that were dragging me away. But for sure, that is all a part of it, is kind of getting exploited in a way. I didn't feel that exploited because they paid me.
Oh, I didn't get paid.
You didn't get paid? Well, okay, yeah. You should have, yeah.
I think it's something to be said, though, right? As like Indigenous students, like we're not just doing research, and like we're not, even if we're like doing engagement, like a lot of, I don't know how you all felt, but for me personally, like I felt like if the people are like, hey, there's an opportunity to speak to Native students, like I felt obligated to do that because I didn't see those role models in myself growing up. And I feel like I'm sometimes obligated to give these talks because the type of curriculum that's currently there is lacking, and it's not sufficient. Yeah. And I don't want other people to go forward thinking that only these old dead white guys who are like the founding fathers of our discipline. Like that's not the case, And so I know I personally need to learn how to say no better, because I'm not good at that. But also I just feel like there's so much work to be done. And so like, I'm like so excited to see these emerging scholars and ones that I've mentored who are really changing these conversations. I'm like, good, we need you here. Like, I'm tired already, So, but I mean, I have lots of ideas, but like, we just need more people to do them. So I think that part makes me feel really excited. And I also sometimes wonder with my peers, I'm like, what is it like to just do research, to not be doing all these extra projects? Like, I would really love to know, but there's just so much work to be done.
That's so true. And, I think that's probably one of the bigger points of this whole center is, we're trying to find our own way around what's already existing out there without discarding some of the stuff that's really good, good research is just good research, but the foundation of it, we feel, should emanate from our own ways of thinking, what's important. If I took a soils course as an undergrad, I probably wasn't told once that it was used to make paint, or that, a certain size fraction is ideal for, making the kind of paint you need. So, rewriting that curriculum, or that, the foundation of that discipline, I think is a really important step in moving toward coming up with our own methodological approaches to research. And I think that's I think that was an excellent point you brought up. Well, we have we have an emerging scholar here with us. Keisha just graduated with her bachelor's, and she's going to be moving on into graduate school, I think. Is that right? Can I get a thumbs up on that, Keisha?
Yeah, I will be. I'm kind of in a position COVID holding things up, but yep, that is what I
Yeah.
would be doing.
And your discipline that you're going into has a lot to do with soil, yes?
It can in archaeology side.
It can? Yeah.
It,
Well, that's where the stuff's buried at, right?
I guess, working with the Confederated Citizen Kootenai tribes and the work that I have done in the past, it's typically a preservation in place thing. And so we look at different ways to do it. But yeah, as archaeologists in Australia and everything, it's a lot of digging.
A lot of digging around.
Lots of time in the soil.
Yeah. I mean, digging around in the soil.
Oh, that was close.
Yes. That was a close one. I did say dirt. I'll edit it out. I'll edit it out.
Yeah. But in my soils classes, we had like half of the class was archaeologists too, right? And understanding a lot of the same methods of aging soils that are important to us as soil scientists, like are also important to archaeologists to understand the ecosystem. And like I remember one of the most fascinating things that I learned was how like pack rat urine was used to like preserve artifacts. And so like when people saw like artifacts and like pack rat dens, it was preserved from the rat urine. And like that was such an important way of crystallizing those samples. And like who would have known, right?
Brenda's shaking her head saying, cool. No, all wrong. No.
I just learned something. Whoa.
Just saying.
That don't work for food, though, right? You can't preserve food with that.
No.
Pack rat pee. No.
But some people in Arizona eat pack rats traditionally.
Yes.
So
wow. San Carlos.
Yeah.
Yep.
No.
It's not bad. Tastes okay.
Yeah. Well,
the pee or the pack rat?
There's mixed reviews on that.
I will clarify. The rat.
You're talking about the the rat. Okay.
Oh boy.
Well, that's okay. We don't want to spiral.
Anyways.
Let's not spiral.
Moving on.
Yeah. Moving on from pack rat pee, but that's interesting.
Science. Oh.
Yeah. So, anybody have any specific questions related to what Lydia? I want to keep wanting to call you Dr. Jennings, but I didn't know that you didn't
can call it
quite
preemptively.
finish.
So
almost done.
Almost there.
Let's just do it. I want to do it. Well, Selena was in that boat too, right? So Selena, I kept calling her doctor, and she was not quite done yet.
I have another question for you, Lydia. Tell us a little bit more about that case study that you were talking about.
Yeah, so I'm working on looking at a mine that's down in the Santa Rita Mountains. And it's a proposed copper mine. It would be the third largest copper mine in the United States. Wow. And in that area, south of Tucson near Sahuarita, which is where my field study site's at, there's already 2 other mines there. So it'll be the third one. And it's been under a lot of controversy. I mean, the community, so there's 2 different tribes. My tribe, the Pascua Yaqui, the Tonatam Nation, the Hopi, have done 2 different lawsuits to protect that mountain range. Sarah, you're probably familiar with it because it's a home where jaguar has been spotted in that region, one of the only jaguars in the United States, as well as a lot of other endangered animal species and plant species in that area. So it's been a big area of controversy. And what I'm really looking at in my research assessment is just looking at the tribal consultation practice and what happened and how has that changed. And this being a relatively modern mining site. And so it's been kind of just a timeline of what that process has been and then why, as of last year, the mine was basically shut down. But when I say shut down, I think it probably means they're going to try again in 2023. And it was partially because the 9th District of Courts basically said that the way that they were handling the mining waste was not sufficient because they'd be storing it on public lands, and that's not along the NEPA protocols. So it's allowed me to really expand my knowledge in policy and environmental assessments in a way that typical microbiologists don't have. But also, what I'm trying to continue to promote in this is that I think tribal nations need to have consultation codes built in, or tribal consultation built into their tribal codes, so that, because I often hear in my working with mining industry and environmental managers, is that they don't really know who to contact or what the process is. And I hear from tribal communities that, well, when they do consultation, they, will send things very late, or they do it the meetings at times of like ceremony, or just far away from the community, and all of these places where they're really missing that communication step. I think that the Resolution Copper Mine, which is up north, they've been doing something a little bit interesting where they actually have a tribal monitors program. And so they're hiring, this is a different mine I should mention, but they're actually hiring a person from each tribal community that is impacted by that mine, and they're training them with the Forest Service to then go through and do environmental assessments and create independent reports that they give back to their tribal nations, which give to the Forest Service, that give them to the mines. And so it's really interesting to see that different approach as opposed to what has happened at this mine. And granted, part of the issue is that they've been trying to do this for 20 plus years. There's been a big history of building up mistrust in that area. And mistrust in communication. And so people don't want to move forward in conversations with one another. So it's just really interesting to see, compare those two different methods. And that's why I kind of come back to having consultation protocols built into our tribal codes, so that people can't say they don't know how to consult with a nation. I think is a really important step for all of our nations and us as environmental scientists and policymakers to think moving forward.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so amazing. It's needed. It's so very much needed. I'm just so impressed with you, Lydia. That is just amazing. And it makes me so mad because so many nations and so many cultures, they do go there and they do exploit our resources, and we're left with not knowing, and we're left with the consequences, and it's horrible. It's disgusting. So I'm glad that you're doing that. That's amazing.
Well, it's funny because actually the first time I met Shadeen was at the Geoscience Alliance, and there is another professor, and I'm forgetting his name. I know he's an archaeologist at SKC, but he was talking about how he thinks...
Oh, he should be on here
tonight.
Remember his name? Right?
Yeah, what is his name?
Yeah, Aaron. Aaron Bryn.
Where is he?
Yeah, that
so Aaron
guy.
was awesome.
He got a pass today.
We're glad you think highly of him.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I thought he was great. We were in a NEPA class together, some workshop together, and he was like, we should be teaching NEPA to kids when they're in elementary school, right? We need to really instill that understanding of people. And that's something that's always stuck with me, because I'm like, it's so true. This is the EIS and NEPA are the protocols we're supposed to go through, which we all know doesn't incorporate, there's not an understanding of cultural significance and spiritual significance in that protocol. Then we have to find other ways of really instilling that in our practices and on our policy.
Yeah, so important to start young, in the more that we can label things our own, originating from our own communities. We talk about the dead white guy and all the stuff in the textbooks existing today. Well, I think a lot of the burden the burden today, lies on us to start creating that content, but more importantly, how that content is delivered too. Though I don't think we can rely on the public school, the even the community college, the university model of education anymore. I think if we truly want to be an indigenous power or an indigenous sovereign entity, I think we also need to exert that sovereignty to the way we teach our children to think in those kind of spaces, or even take them out of that space and reimagine what that looks like. And that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of people getting new and different tools, like the people getting advanced degrees, like Lydia here learning about the soils. I mean, it's all beneficial things that we get from the university. I don't want to say it's all no good, but I think we then have to transform that into something that's more usable for our communities. And I think that's kind of where we're starting to move into now with this center. We've had a many long discussions about what's important culturally and spiritually, and how that might look now we're kind of moving into validating that with the community and see if that actually works on the ground. But let's take just a brief break. We'll listen to this next song, and I'll describe a little bit about it, and then we'll launch into the next half of this this episode. Sound good? Okay, so that was another song that was sung during this Sayudlam dance, and this particular song was sung after the women were done getting their faces painted, after they put on the shirt, the war shirt of the man, and the headdress of the man, in which which had achieved some sort of war deed. And the men would start to sing this song and escort the women into the center of the camp. Slowly, the other women would leave the teepees and join in the procession to the middle. And this would be the kind of the signifying the beginning of this Sayudlam, where the women would celebrate the war victories of the man. And this was exclusively a women's dance, and in this time the women could also be could show praise for other people in certain ways. But there was also another group of women who would act as what they called the fearless ones, and these would be women who also achieved their own war deeds in battle, and they would be acting as sort of clowns, and they would dress up in various things, masks, some crazy outfits, and they'd run among the camp, picking on people to signify their place in the war society as the fearless ones, the ones who had achieved war deeds equal to the man during those times. So this song, I guess, was kind of reminiscent of I guess kind of the thing I was speaking of earlier, kind of our responsibility as Indigenous scholars who've had the opportunity to reach the end of our educational paths, our terminal degrees, I guess, if you will, and kind of that responsibility we have to kind of escort in this new generation of Indigenous scholars with new tools and new content that they can use then to keep evolving this process of making our own way in research, making our own way really to I guess take sovereignty over the knowledge that we have and the knowledge that we can create in the future. So my question to Lydia here, because she's right at the end, almost at the end, just gotta, what, you guys just have to defend? Is that what's going on, or did you already defend?
No, I still have a little more writing to do, and then I'm going to try to defend in September, late September.
Okay, so you're pretty much at the end, just a little bit of writing. Yeah, we'll call it almost at the end. How's that sound? Close enough.
I mean, you know how a PhD is. It feels like it's an emotional roller coaster, and there never is an end, right?
I know. I feel you. Someday I would just sit on the couch and just stare at the TV and just.
I would cry.
Like, what am I doing?
I would cry.
This is why I have an emotional support dog now.
Yeah.
I still do cry.
I have an emotional support. Yeah. got an emotional support TV, an emotional support Netflix subscription. Yeah. But I guess that's kind of the next question. If you could imagine something that would would have helped you, or something that can help some of our emerging scholars like Keisha and Brenda, who's also plugging along in her degree. What do you get in your degree in there,
I think
Brenda?
I went with tribal governance is what I'm gonna finish out after my grant management. So we'll see.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you imagine the future of Indigenous research be, whether it be in your discipline or in any other discipline? How would you envision that?
I don't know. I think Lydia really hit it when she said all we learn is just pretty much, I'm paraphrasing this, but pretty much dead white guy stuff. We're so ingrained in Western science and the science behind it
Yeah.
that we don't stop as tribal people and say, well, what about the TEK that goes with it, And so the vision,
Yeah.
especially being at a tribal college, is focusing more on the tribal educational knowledge aspect of it, and to see that and to incorporate it, and for more and more people to stand up and say, hey, I want to learn more about this, So I guess that's where I vision it
Yeah.
at is, the
Yeah.
whole Western science part of it. I think it's just the norm, and it's taught fairly well, all through our upbringing. And so to be able to focus on that, I think is really a vision that needs to happen. And so when she said that, I was like, yes, this lady, she's got it going on. And the fact that more people are questioning it and are advocating for it, I think is really where the direction we need to go in. So I full-heartedly, that's my vision, is seeing it, So I was loving that. What about you, Keisha? What's your vision, as a coming up and graduating? What do you feel like you want to see?
I guess for my field, so I did some TEK work with the Fish and Wildlife Service this past year, and got the opportunity to go to Alaska and work with people up there who have worked with the tribes up there. And I guess what I gathered from it was that there was a lot of it going on, the implementation of the TEK, but it was kind of the same thing that we're talking about. There's no process to it. So-and-so talked to so-and-so, and they knew they needed to go and look at this particular issue. So yeah, I guess I just kind of same point in the beginning of this whole process of thinking about how do we pull all these things together to make it into, a system, I guess, or protocol that incorporates it.
So Lydia, do you want to respond to what Shandine proposed though? And I think he can.
Yeah. Let me repeat that question. So what I was asking was, how would you imagine or reimagine an education system that allows us to do our own research, to own our own knowledge, to take ownership of that knowledge because it's gained in our own traditional or tribal ways, or even in a new and emerging way in this new evolving time we live in? What would that kind of look like to you, given that you're kind of at the end of your educational journey there?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is that, oh my God, sorry, my dog. I think the biggest one is that having Native people designing the research questions. I see my future as being really utilizing these very Sutter colonial Western science, whatever you want to use, techniques to answer questions that are important to Indigenous people. And that's where I see this fusion happening, that these are really great techniques that are continuing to evolve in typical science and standard science practices, but being able to incorporate that at the same level, same value system with Indigenous knowledge ways of knowing, with Indigenous practices and protocols of data sharing, asking questions and having Indigenous community-based research questions and community members involved in making those questions is really where I see the direction going. Now, can that be accomplished at a primary white institution? I don't know. And I think that's why a tribal college is really appealing. When I see some of the most innovative techniques coming out, I really see them coming out of tribal colleges because they don't have the same institutional barriers that you have at a primary white serving institution. And I think if people are doing really cutting edge, they're kind of put into American Indian Studies departments and ethnic studies departments where even though they're doing science, they weren't trained in American Indian Studies, they were trained in a scientific practice or public health practice. But that's like, well, you talk about Indians, so you go to this department. And I think that's really problematic. So
it is. It really is.
Yeah.
Totally.
And that's what I tend to see when I look at, my friends and I have been really talking and looking about where, if we want to go into academia, where we would go. And yeah, a big institution has a lot of funding and has a lot of nice perks to it, right? But in terms of doing the types of questions and the research that I feel like is really based on serving Indigenous people, I just don't see, I'm not sure if a primary white serving institution can do that. And I think I'm still conflicted. I'm in this process right now of applying for postdocs because I don't feel like I have enough publications yet to be a full faculty. And it's a really interesting process because it's how do I navigate being able to do questions that serve Native people in the capacity I want while still studying interesting soil science questions. And I don't see postdoc applications out there. So I'm applying for my own grant money and creating my own projects, right? That's the only way I see that it can really do the two things that I want and being comprehensive. And I think a lot of funding agencies say they want to support Native scholars, but let's see if that happens in them awarding those kind of grants that are a little more innovative to what they typically put out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think Brenda, what that really came up to me when you were speaking is like this difference of tribal colleges versus primary white serving institutions and what their value systems are. And even just in how employees are treated and that life work balance, I think is something I think a lot about. That I just don't, I just see so many people in academia going through divorces and having a hard time. Whereas a tribal college, it seems like it's more community centered and that's the kind of life that I want to live. So I don't know. How about you all? You all have come to a tribal college. What was your pathways of getting there?
It's on my reservation. It's home.
Nice.
I'm just
you got the inside connect.
So that's how I started. And then I just feel like, there's a lot of tribal colleges in the nation that are really kind of paving the way. Sometimes I feel like SKC does that on a lot of levels. But then they kind of lack on certain things like culture, whereas maybe other colleges are thriving in culture, but lacking in like the Western academics and learning that aspect of it. And so tribal colleges are just so unique in general, and so I just wish that TEK was more involved in SKC, and it's just huge though. But yeah, so that's how I came about with my tribal colleges, just because it's here and it's home, and I don't know anything else, and I feel like a lot of people that go to universities, they always feel different being Native and being in a big university. I feel like it's intimidating for them, and so I don't know. It's always the next step.
I know that I started out at the University of Montana and majored in anthropology and archaeology and then minored in Native American studies and was trying to blend the two together for myself because there wasn't too much overlap or I guess to the level that I wanted it to be. But then once I learned more about the Tribal Historic Preservation Program at SKC, I thought, oh, well, this is exactly what I've been trying to create for myself. So that's why I transferred there.
Yeah, this balance that we're talking about between like Western academics and, a local community of culture is really interesting to me, and definitely something that we're trying to improve at SKC. But so I'm thinking about how I came to SKC, and even though I'm from the area, I got this distinct impression as a teenager that in order for me to do the kind of work that I, hope to do, aspire to do, I'd have to go outside. I needed to leave the area and go into that university Western academic setting. And it was like seen as this trip. You're going to go someplace else and it's totally different. And you need to do that because that's where you get these tools, this information. And then you get to bring that back. And so, like, I never went to a tribal college as a student, like trying to acquire knowledge, trying to figure things out and be, um, part of the community at that stage of the process. It was like, all right, I'm going to go and get this information. And then I'm going to come back to a tribal college and try and figure out how much of it do they want? What do the students think of this? What does the community think of this? How is it useful for them? So, I mean, I'm interested in the balance because I'm coming at it from this other perspective. Like, all right, how do I communicate this information? And I guess I'm really, really thinking about how do I communicate this information and not give the impression that, okay, these are I don't even know, the qualifications, these are the criteria, this is what you need to do because Western science says this is what you need to do. And then you can find spaces around it and maybe little cracks within it to put your cultural perspective or these like little side projects you want to do. So I'm really trying to find a way to shift that, and so I'm wondering how you've been working with that, Lydia.
Well, I think it comes to this question, right, of how do we train students and work with students in a way that we're honoring these interests of theirs and these passions of the environment, but also making them employable to some type of system. And one of the things that I have found really interesting is that there's so many programs to support students going into the geosciences. I mean, there's a fair amount, right? But what are the types of jobs that they're employed afterwards? I looked at it myself. My training is in mining reclamation, and the number one employer for me to work is mining companies. But I don't really, in terms of my own personal values, that's not really where I think I want to go. And so, so where does that leave me? I could do consulting. I can do working for a federal agency or academia. And so really trying to figure that out and making sure that before we encourage students to go into these types of disciplines, there are those conversations about, okay, if you do this, these are the types of jobs that are available for you. Mm-hmm. And if not, how do we give them the skill sets to be able to create their own pathways? And I think that that's something that really has to be communicated before we can continue to push students to STEM, because that's what federal granting agencies are promoting, right? Is how do we really do that community care component? And I'm not sure at this point. I think I'm still navigating that pathway. One thing that I continue to push and is like, well, we need to have Indigenous co-land management. That's a place where I see myself fitting into those conversations. Some of the work that I do is with the outdoor industry. And so also promoting, like, we want Indigenous people to be managing the systems. How do we create navigation? How do we navigate pathways for that? But I'm still in that process of trying to understand and figure that out, because I have definitely seen that discrepancy in my own education and in talking with students in the Geoscience Alliance. I'm seeing a lot of people who went and got these advanced degrees and then feeling really disheartened about what the options are once they do finish and they want to take care of their families. How do we do that in an equitable way that's in line with our moral compass?
When you talk about kind of creating our own path or creating our own like job description, like what you're mentioning, I feel like that also involves a little bit of risk. You know, we have to sort of be these pioneers in these positions that aren't even created yet. And at least, sometimes I feel that pressure being like, it just puts you in such a susceptible role, even though it is really exciting and very important and valuable work. But there's also this component of having to be the trailblazer is kind of exhausting sometimes, quite frankly. I don't know if you all feel the same, but.
Absolutely. And I think another pathway that I actually really see a lot of Native people thriving in potentially is the science communication that's happening right now. And I think Native people were naturally, well, maybe not myself particularly, but like I think in general, our communities are really natural storytellers. And I think right now there's a really big thirst in the larger society of wanting to understand Native peoples because their traditional education has really left out our narratives. So I think that's something that I really see. I mean, you look at like Native Instagram or Twitter, or TikTok, right? And people are so creative in the things that they're doing, and it allows them that creativity to incorporate the science. And so that's something, and I mean, bringing in artistic talents that our communities are rich in, that I really see as a potential pathway of really developing in the future. So, but again, it is this carving our own pathways that's scary and hard. And does not have the same kind of security as the standard pathways do. And I think if you don't have, if you don't have a lot of obligations in your life, it's easier to do so than those that do have a lot of family to care for.
Right. Right.
And community responsibility,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not maybe much help when you're feeling like you're blazing that trail and how risky it is. But I mean, like listening to this conversation, listening to everything that you're talking about, it's so interesting to me, and it kind of gives me this hope, because I've got this maybe a piece of an idea that the work you're doing, the work that all of you guys are doing, is amazing. And when it's compared to the work that has been done for a really long time, just coming from this one perspective, right? That Western academic perspective, things have been what they've been for a while, and you're doing something different. And like I said, my hope is that people are going to see that and be as amazed as I am, and want more of that, want to learn how to do that, because frankly, it sounds better to me than what we've been doing.
Yes,
I love that. Way to go. Cue up the clapping thing. Yeah. Shandine will add that.
Right, there you go.
And so what you're talking about, right, that's actually like been scientifically proven. It's called the diversity innovation paradox. And it's this idea that diverse scholars from different backgrounds, they're able to make all these novel connections in ways that the standard science practices don't. And this is exactly why we want to have more representation of diverse people, especially Indigenous people, in the science practices. But we have to make sure that these places are comfortable for us to exist in. And I'm sure, I know you all are doing that. I know you all are doing that. So thank you for having these conversations.
That exists.
Go ahead, sorry.
But it's like a delayed effect, right? I mean, I read about that too. So there is that proven idea, but then it's not really recognized until like after the fact. Like those discoveries can happen, but there's it doesn't gain recognition right away. So there's still a lot of, I think, change that needs to happen.
I mean, that's like basically like every time a Western scientist reproves or rediscovers something that Native people have been saying for centuries in their oral histories, right? Like, but it wasn't believed until like some Western scientists, rediscovered it. So
and renamed it.
Yep.
Yes.
I know I'm full of one-liners tonight.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm realizing poor Lydia's got her puppy there, probably ready to go out for a nice run with her. But maybe, Selena, do you want to kind of close us out here, since we've maybe lost Shandine?
I do. I just have to say, I kept trying to think of this great, amazing question for a amazing a visitor to us. And the one thing that I kept going back to was, gosh, I want my daughters to hear your story, Lydia, because just being a Native, an Indigenous female scientist, like, I think I don't know. I just want to hear just a little bit about what motivated you to take that path, and who was it? Was it part of the culture that encouraged you to continue to go down, or what was that motivating factor? Just so that, our daughters and our nieces who maybe take the time to listen to this can say, okay, yeah, that is something I can do. My daughter talks about being a geologist all the time, and it gets me excited, but to be able to hear somebody like you and see somebody like you will allow her to know that she can do that. So that's my question for you tonight before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think maybe to become a scientist is like it's a meandering river, but I often think back to like my grandpa and seeing him garden and seeing his like daily interactions with the land, even though it was a little garden, and having his plants and really talking to that. My love of running and like being out in the land and making observations, and then taking science classes that actually gave me the language to record what those observations are. And then thinking back to my grandpa's stories, right? And then my dad is also a really avid gardener. So I think both of those, but my mom is the one. So I will say I didn't grow up in my homelands. I grew up in northern New Mexico. And so my mom is the one who's always kind of rooted me in my community and made sure, even if I wasn't there, that I had the knowledge of my community and to go and visit. So I think I come myself from these kind of two different perspectives of thinking and seeing the world. And I think that kind of comes out also in understanding that they have to coexist as we move forward, and not having one dominate the other. I think it's really natural. It's kind of the natural balance and harmony of our systems. And I've kind of seen it within my own family relationships, right? Of that importance of balance and of harmony. And so I would say, I guess those are kind of the things that have brought me together. But it's also been, anytime there was opportunity to see something and do something different, I was kind of the kid who was like, all right, let's do it. In school, people are like, you should apply to this program. Like, okay, I'm going to do it. And it allowed me to see so many different perspectives that really have shaped my worldview and my understanding. And by traveling to different places, when I did my undergrad in California, and I worked, monitoring agricultural fields and seeing how people in the Salinas Valley are picking these fruits and vegetables that they can't afford to buy themselves, and understanding the environmental justice and the pesticide contamination, how it's impacting them. Those are all things that made me think back to my own experience growing up, and how my friends and my family, are ones who are addressing these environmental issues while other people can put their hand in the sand. So I think it's all of those things of, one, like always being proud of where you come from and the people who shaped you, and then being open to new opportunities that continue to shape you. Just like we're a canyon, right? And we get shaped by the wind and the water that makes us strong. So I guess that's kind of my gist.
Oh my gosh. That's beautiful.
Awesome. Isn't it? I know when you said your grandpa.
That's my first like soil scientist teacher, right? Is my grandpa, and like him out there, my dad,
Yes.
So,
well, thank you for sharing your story with us. I think all of us learned something. I know I did, and just really gave us that motivation to keep doing this work. And I think Shondine and the IRC team have great plans for you in the future, and I hope I get to interact with you and learn from you some more. I feel really honored to be part of this conversation. I've learned a lot tonight, so thank you, Lydia. I want to call you Dr. Jennings, and so maybe I'll give you the Indian name my husband gave me when I was in your position. He called me Dr. Almost.
That's fitting. That's fitting. Well, I just want to say, I just want to thank you all for having me in this conversation, because I think this podcast is so needed. I'm lucky to be at the University of Arizona where there's other Native scholars, but I know a lot of Native scholars don't have this kind of community. And so even just to sit in on like a table with the aunties, and shutting once a week and be able to listen to this podcast and be part of that, I think is just so special. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode. And to learn more, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at IRCSKC. You can find us also on Facebook and YouTube by searching SKC Indigenous Research Center. You can also visit our website at irc.skc.edu. Don't forget to join us next time as we continue our discussions on Indigenous research Indigenous research methodologies, and Indigenous worldviews.